We are recording. Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Niamh Carruthers. Niamh is a consultant at 2 into 3, which is a consulting firm for the non-profit sector. She joined the firm as a trainee consultant in 2019 as part of their graduate programme, rather than joining as a usual analyst, and now works as a consultant. Between 2014 and 2018, Niamh studied Sociology Spanish at Trinity College Dublin, so once again is another alumnus. During her time at Trinity, Niamh was actively involved in volunteering and fundraising, working closely with St Vincent de Paul, Trinity Jailbreak, and the TCD Students' Union. Niamh is a great example of how Trinity students can have success with a career in consulting, having not done a business background or been part of business school. In this case, she studied a non-business degree from the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Niamh, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Before we go into consulting and technical things like that, and advice for our listeners, just starting with Trinity generally. I mean, I've only just joined as a master's student, so I actually don't know much about the true Trinity experience yet. So for the 4 years you studied Sociology and Spanish, how would you reflect on your time at Trinity?
Well, I loved Trinity. You can hear from my American accent that I started out in quite a small town in Connecticut. But coming to Dublin, I suppose, I had family here, so it wasn't too tough. But the world was so wide open to me. I was able to pick the subjects and the societies and the people that moved me and inspired me. And I suppose what was so unique when I look back and talk to other people about their time in college, particularly people who went to college somewhere else, was that society life piece. Where else do you have the resources and the people with the same passion at your feet like that? I was surrounded by people just like you are, Hugo, who are always pushing a little further and thinking outside the box. So even the idea of a consulting society, I never knew about this when I was in Trinity. So I don't know if it's new or I had my head too far in the sand with volunteering, but I thought it was no, I think everyone jokes when they leave, I would do anything to go back, but I felt like it really set me up well. And I found a job 3 days out the door. So wow. I think that Trinity does brilliantly at preparing its students. So even if you're feeling a bit panicked, all of you out there, it'll work out.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the moment of hope. And you're completely right. The society is really new. It was set up this September. So brilliant. It's really, we're trying to use the bigger societies to help like co-run projects and things. When you approach your penultimate and final year in college, what job or career did you see yourself having? Was it very set on the non-profit charitable sectors, or were you persuaded by any other areas at that point?
Well, I'd always wanted to work in NGOs. I was so consumed with everything in college and I was so busy all of the time that it was actually quite difficult to plan ahead. I was trying to soak it all in. And so I knew a lot of people who had done internships with, the Big Four and things like that. And I was going home to the States in the summer. So I was traveling a lot. So I had always wanted to be on the ground doing humanitarian work, whether that started with volunteering or whatever else. But what I knew for sure was that the notion of business actually really turned me off. I found economics surprisingly interesting, but it was really difficult for me. My brain just didn't click right away. I had to work harder at it. And I was never a particularly mathematical person. I could never reconcile maybe my more like emotional, intuitive side with that very logical, practical business. What my idea was of a business career, but I guess in the second half of first year, I got involved with Vincent de Paul, and I'd wanted to volunteer doing activities on the, with the people, but there was a big Garda vetting debacle that year, so I never got my vetting until the next year. So in the meantime, I joined fundraising, and I helped plan fundraising and social events for VDP, and I had a knack for it. And I guess from there, I slowly started to see myself in a fundraising role. So I imagined that I would be a fundraiser for a charity. And that kind of started because I knew I loved everything about the not-for-profit world. And I'd been there for a long time in one way or another, but I guess I thought I would be a fundraiser.
Yeah, brilliant. And what was your favourite little moment of fundraising during Trinity? Did you have a particular charity or event that resonates the
Oh
most?
gosh, yeah. So I was the vice president and I was the head of fundraising for VDP, and that was tough because I was also the director of Jailbreak, and Jailbreak is an event that you plan for a year. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot out of you. And you know, I loved everything I did. I loved Students' Union. I loved all that. But the moment the Jailbreak finished, when our people were running across the finish line, it's I don't know if you know about it, Hugo, but it's basically students try to get from Dublin. It started off as far as they can in the world without using any of their own money, and it goes to Vincent de Paul and Amnesty. And when we were doing it, you had to get to location X, and we paired up with Uncle Mongelic, and we picked San Marino in Italy, and so I was pulling a night in the HQ, you know, tracking our teams and fundraising and trying to get that money up. And then I was getting on a flight at 5 a.m. to go to Bologna to run to San Marino. And it really is a race at the end. So it was really fun, I guess, to see, you know, no one had slept but everyone had been working hard to fundraise, and seeing that all kind of come together. There's nothing like that. You won't get that when you get out of college. It was very exciting.
Yeah, I suppose that's a real like university subject.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
absolutely. Very Trinity.
That's brilliant. I wish I'd done that before actually as undergrad. And you mentioned how economics really interested you, but you weren't that into the maths and sort of practical side of business. But then
Yeah,
again,
I
I suppose
never considered it.
consulting, and now you're at 3 into 2. I suppose consulting is a very
Yeah.
practical, business-oriented profession. So,
Yeah.
when did the interest in consulting begin from your non-profit beginnings?
Actually, very late in the game. I won't lie to you, and I feel safe here because I'm addressing non-business students for the most part. You might be a business student, but hopefully you all won't laugh at me. But I hadn't the faintest idea what consulting even was. The only notion I had of consulting was KPMG, the big four prodigies who did mysterious business-related activities like tax, and it was very daunting. And no shade to people who do tax, I know a few of them, but as I became increasingly involved in VDP and as head of fundraising and then directing Jailbreak, I had to learn to build sustainable processes from the ground without even realizing it. So for example, Jailbreak had been running for several years when I took over, and it had always done really, really well. But when I got behind the scenes, I saw that it would fall apart in a few more years if we didn't take steps to build a more solid foundation underneath it. So instead of fundraising the most ever that year, we wrote a governing document, and we made our own, and I didn't realize it at the time because I do strategic plans, but we did a little strategy for it. So that was kind of, as I learned how working behind the scenes to kind of build capacity can be really transformative. So as college started to finish up, I realized from my time with VDP that in order to fundraise really effectively, I needed some business knowledge, some corporate know-how. And I knew that while I hadn't gotten that necessarily from my courses, I mean, I did a little bit of economics, but it was mainly, why is there poverty? And, golden age Spanish literature. I knew that I could learn a lot of those practical skills on the job, using those critical thinking skills you get from the arts. And, once I started looking into consulting, I realized that there were lots of different types. So much of it is just buzzwords. And if you Google what those buzzwords mean, it's suddenly far less daunting. So consulting itself just means providing a service to somebody else who doesn't have the time or the expertise to do it, so they call on you. So for me, even though I've never been a fundraiser, I've done so much research, and I have a research background from sociology that it is very research based, and so I guess I kind of got into it when I hadn't even known there was consulting for nonprofits. I actually was just going to take any consulting job to get the business knowledge and then move into the sector with that edge, but it worked out differently.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's also a really great example of how everything has transferable aspects to consulting. I think it's a really good thing to tell to all our listeners that regardless of your degree background or initial career, like you can always move to consulting at any time and never be afraid of it. And you mentioned using 3-2 as a vehicle to get business knowledge and things. So you've now worked there for 2 years, am I right? Is it 2 years?
Yeah, 2.5, yeah. So,
and can you tell us about the company itself? Because it's quite a niche company, and perhaps the role that you have, because it's you started off as a graduate sort of trainee consultant as opposed to usual analyst, and how do those roles compare? And you tell me a bit more about your role specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been 2.5 years now. I started working at 2 into 3, 3 days after my final exams wrapped up. I thought I was going to have a nice little summer holiday to celebrate finishing college, and they said, no, we need you now. So I started, like you said, as a consulting trainee, and it was a grad program, but it wasn't the grad program in the traditional sense. It was just me. And then there was one guy on the recruitment side. So it was kind of me. It was almost like an apprenticeship, which is really unique these days. It's a very small company. It was just about 8 of us at any one time. And the name 2 into 3 comes from 2 being the private sector and 3 being the voluntary or not-for-profit sector. So it basically stands for putting private corporate knowledge or business know-how into, like, infusing it into the voluntary sector. So not-for-profits in the last 10 years have professionalized so much, and they really need that business know-how in order to succeed. And so our mission would be, I guess, to build capacity in the sector so that organizations who are, we call them mission driven, so they're driven by impact, I guess, rather than profit, so that they can have a transformative impact on society. And so we do this through recruitment, consulting, and research. So we've got our recruitment side of the business, and then I'm consulting and research with a few others. And we develop fundraising strategies and strategic plans, which you could also call business plans, with different organizations across the sector. We do governance reviews, organization reviews, and a lot of research. We're kind of contracted to do some research pieces, because consulting a thought leader, you know the best practices, I suppose. So I started out supporting, as a trainee, I started out supporting the consultants as they delivered strategies. I was doing the background work, very admin-y, putting the slides together for the workshops and other kind of project coordination tasks. And as I moved into the analyst position and I got more confident, that role grew as I started supporting more and more, taking more onto my own plate, until all of a sudden I was nearly running the strategies myself, and that's when I became a consultant. And then I was moved to the product lead for Ireland for strategic planning. And so what that is I sit down with different not-for-profits to develop what their plan is for the next 3 to 5 years. So that includes their mission. So we would have lots of workshops with all their stakeholders or people close to the organization, and we say, like, well, why do you exist? Why do you exist today? Maybe it's different from why you existed 10 years ago when you were founded, but why do you exist today, and where do you want to go? And then we help them sort out their goals for how to get there. And some of that is financial planning and other more technical things, but you definitely get used to it. But I suppose I usually would then stay involved with the organization afterward to provide support to them and their board. So we would work across the sector, and it's like helicoptering the whole not-for-profit sector. It's very interesting.
Cool. Yes, it's a very multifaceted role. And on that note, you mentioned, so obviously you mentioned 2 is the private and 3 is the non-profit sector. I mean, obviously you had 3 nailed down pretty well by the time you joined. And yeah. So so I'm sure you're very capable with the transfer stuff straight away, but as you mentioned, the maths and the business knowledge being slightly scary and all these buzzwords being frightening. So how was that side of the work initially? And you mentioned both business and finance then, was your private business role more financially focused or business focused? And did it take time to get to grips with these kind of things, or would you say it went more smoothly than you expected?
Definitely more business oriented. There's always going to be, just like how, and all the finance people will scowl at me, but for me, just like there's always going to be evil in the world, there's always going to be maths, and I can't avoid it forever. So but business, is very, logical and methodical. And so I had to get a much thicker skin and quickly, because you're going to make lots of mistakes. And so it was smooth in one sense that they eased me into the job, where I was doing things that maybe weren't so hard at first, because they're not going to, cast you off the cliff until you're ready. or they think you are. But there are positives and negatives to working in such a small company, first of all. And the negative is that I often felt like I was under the microscope. You know, every little action was kind of analyzed and up for critique. But at the same time, that was a good thing because I was working with experts who taught me everything that I know, and they gave me the space to develop my own style with clients. And so I have no sales know-how. There is a business development aspect to consulting. You know, you are seeking new business. And I was always quite bad at asking for things, but and I also never considered myself great at maths. But what I did was I adopted a motto for myself when the going got a little rough. And I would tell myself to remember my strengths and to look to use them wherever I could to make what I did more personal. So the people around me were much more, not impersonal. They were much more logical and methodical, and they would keep it, they had a cooler business style where mine was very warm. And I decided that it's okay to be warm in business because it's personal and you're working with organizations who trust you. And then the other part is to take your weaknesses, and if you can't make them strengths, just work on making them not weaknesses, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So
and
sorry,
no, thanks. And you mentioned how you and your colleagues had different approaches. You know, you're warmer, trying to get a thicker skin. They're slightly more, technical with their lingo. But despite these differences, would you say there are any specific consulting skills that all graduates should have, that everyone should have? And have these become obvious while working at 2 into 3, or would you say there's no specific skill you need and it's all bespoke to yourself?
Well, I guess the trick is confidence. So like I said, I'm not a financially minded person, and you're going to have to learn the basics, but it's really good to know the basics in everything, I think, to be able to, to have a few words, enough to get by. But building confidence is the trick because, and also doing the research, putting in, take the time to do your reading, because you don't actually have to do everything. When I'm developing a strategy with my clients, I'm actually not the one developing the financial plan. I've learned, I used to panic for so much time about how I would do that part until my boss reminded me that I'm not an accountant. I'm a management consultant. Clients who put together a project team, and that team will have a person to support me. So I guess my specific consulting skills that you should have for management consulting: sit up straight, make eye contact. I'm doing the best I can on Zoom here, but you need to gain your client's trust first, and you need to trust yourself to do that. So think before you speak. You'll be advising your clients on some difficult decisions. That's when you have a consultant in, is when it's a decision that is tough and you need backup. But you won't be making the decisions for them. Sometimes you'll disagree with them, but you're an advisor. And listening is key. So really active listening. You can practice this in conversation. So I've learned the most important thing is to listen to what's being said, but also to listen to what's not being said, because that will prove really, really key later on when some challenge comes up that they didn't tell you, and you kind of knew, whether that's, there's an issue with the board or something like that. So I think, and it's about, working hard to make people feel heard. Change is really hard, and consulting, not always, but for me, management consulting is about supporting change. And it's really important to reassure someone that their concerns are being heard. And I keep saying, do your homework. So you learn the hard way, or at least I did, that there's nothing worse than being asked what you think and you didn't read the documents or prepare enough. So that's really important. And finally, I guess, ask for help. Even though I'm a product lead now, I let my boss know when I'm feeling out of my depth by asking to arrange a meeting where I can just ask my questions. And most importantly, what would you have done there? So no matter how far you get, even at the beginning, if you have a million questions and you feel silly for asking, I would set aside a meeting and bring your list of questions and ask, because that's how you learn from that kind of practical experience.
Well, thank you so much. That was so comprehensive and had loads of personal ideas too. That's brilliant. And don't worry. That's all the sort of on-the-job questions done. But just for the last part, one of the reasons we were so keen to have you, Niamh, is because you're, as a non-business student, we're really reaching out to non-business business undergrads and graduates to tell them that consulting is still a very much achievable career that they should be thinking about. And so I just wanted to ask you at the end quickly, for our non-business students who are listening and who are interested by what consulting is and what it means, but are unsure of where to start, what would your advice be? I mean, you mentioned you love to use it as a vehicle for change. So I suppose it's very, you can use it in a very broad way, but what would if you had one specific bit of advice, what would it be?
Absolutely. Consulting is a catch-all term. You can be a consultant in literally anything. There are ethics consultants, financial consultants, legal, IT, HR. It's not just the type that, for me, like I thought there was this one kind of consulting. But consulting is learning a skill or being an expert in something, or even not, knowing enough about something and kind of being an advisor to someone. So my advice is find out what you're interested in. I'm really passionate about not-for-profits, and for me, being able to build up their capacity so that they can help more people and make a bigger impact is great. So consulting for me is about working behind the scenes to create something that I believe in. So I think the question is, what do you believe in? And it's not, not-for-profits are great, but they're not for everybody. You might be really passionate about HR. Start there. And remember that, where you start will not be where you finish. If you want to be an art consultant, let's say you won't start picking out, works of art for important clients. You'll start on the ground and learn basic skills. Learn Excel. Important. And I guess, a good consultant can give know-how advice, even if they haven't done the thing. I've never been a professional fundraiser, but I know a lot about fundraising because I've done my reading and my research, and I've written my research, and I'm not afraid to give advice on it. So yeah, I would say attend some webinars, email people in that field to see what path they took. How did they get there? Even you look at someone who maybe is like a partner or something, where did they start? They might have started somewhere very different. So it's interesting to see the different pathways.
And furthermore, using Niamh as a sort of eye-opener for our non-business students and listeners. You've just given them some advice, but if you were to pitch 2 into 3 to these students and the consulting industry more generally, what would you say are the main benefits of pursuing consulting as a career? Very briefly, into 2 or 3 points.
Okay, for me, the main benefit in pursuing a career in consulting was learning something from the ground up. So you will become an expert in something and you'll own it, and that's a really great feeling. Consulting skills are really transferable. So let's say you're maybe thinking about being a consultant and you don't know if you want to be a consultant forever. My former boss is now a fund manager in a really big trust and foundation organization. You could do anything after you consult. You could do anything before you consult. It is very transferable. And it's people-centered and it's social. So for me, there's days where you'll be doing your research and your prep and doing proposals, but you're going to have a lot of face-to-face time with people who are often really passionate about what they do, and they're seeking help to do it better. And it's really exciting to be there involved in the processes and decisions that might elevate an organization. And you could be a part of that. You're behind the scenes for some really big things happening. And maybe for any women listening, it feels really amazing to command respect from men 3 times your age because you did your homework and listened closely. That's a great feeling. So that would be my advice, my pitch, I guess. It's great to feel like an expert in something, and it's great to know that with that, you could go anywhere after. You could do anything, after you become a consultant.
Wow. Niamh, thank you so much for your time today, and your answers have been really passionate and insightful. Hopefully, it will help our viewers, especially our non-business viewers, who are curious about what a career in consulting may lead to, what it entails, and what the day-to-day practicalities really are. So I hope you've made it less frightening to them and less opaque to them. So
not so scary.
Yeah. So thanks so much, and
thank you for having me.
I hope to be in contact soon. Thanks, Niamh.